Okay? And so I think it's okay to say that our motto is truly back, 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 back to the future. Back to the future. The future requires that we go back to our roots. And that's where they are in the 1st century. And we are unapologetic about landing there, organizationally, structurally. All right? That's the second reason. We said it's better to start flat and tweak it where we need than to start with more and have to try to get rid of it. Because you know how hard it is to get rid of bureaucracies. They are self-perpetuating. You better believe they are. I'll guarantee you that they are. It's way hard to get rid of something once you've stuck it in place. So we said, let's start flat and add what we need as we go along. We're not stupid. We agree. You know, we understand that we might have to have a little bit something more as we move along, but we'll figure that out as we go. So there wasn't anybody else as flat as we were. Number 3, and I think this is the best distinctive about LCMC. There's not another Lutheran Church body in existence in the United States today, and CORE is working on, through the NALC, given the same kind of representation, but right now, there's not another Lutheran Church body that gives the same kind of representative voice and vote to its member congregations. Number 1, every congregation gets delegates to the annual gathering, where any of the business of the association is conducted. They are delegates that represent their congregations. They are not voting members who do not. Once a congregation reaches 750 in average worship attendance, they get a third, 1,000 a fourth. For every 250 in average worship attendance after 500, a congregation gets an additional delegate. But let's say 100% of delegates to our annual gathering voted to change our constitution. That change wouldn't take effect until 2/3 of our member congregations in individual votes in their congregation during the next 2 years vote to ratify that change, or it doesn't take effect. Let's say we change our bylaws. If in the next year, 51% of our member congregations register a no vote to that change in our bylaws, that change doesn't take effect. Let's say we change our ministry standards, much as the ELCA changed its ministry standards in August. If during the next 12 months, the most stringent ratification process in the association, if in the next 12 months, 2/3 of our member congregations in individual votes in their congregation don't vote to ratify that change, it does not take effect. And so in every way that's important, our Constitution, our bylaws, our ministry standards, the congregations of this association have a direct voice and vote in the governance of LCMC. I tell people wherever I go, if we do things right and you're a member congregation in LCMC, you will share the credit. And if we do things wrong, you will share the blame. All right? But that's okay. Because you're the church. And you ought to have a real voice. You ought to be able to screw up. You ought to be able to do things right. You ought to have a voice. And in LCMC, you have one. Those are the 3 distinctives about this association. If you have this brochure, this is what I'm walking through. It's the questions and answers that people usually ask about LCMC wherever I go. I'm not going to take time to walk through all of them. I'm going through the first few this morning because they're the most important. And then I will, during the questions and answers time, answer any questions you have about the rest of them. But I do want to get to a couple more. One is number 3. Can a congregation belong to a Lutheran denomination such as the ELCA and LCMC at the same time? And it's important that you understand this because I believe that the church right now needs what I'm about to tell you. Because there are so many congregations of the ELCA that are divided, and they need some place where they can be and perhaps at the same time stay in the ELCA that will hold their congregation together in this time of trying to figure things out. All right? So from our perspective in LCMC, the answer to that question is yes. You can belong to the ELCA and to LCMC at the same time. Do I think it's wise over the long term? Probably not. But in the short term, especially in today's climate in the church, absolutely, I think that it's a good solution for some congregations. If you were to ask your bishop, and if you've read David Swartling's memo that was issued a couple months ago, or Lowell Allman's memo that was issued 8 years ago that said the same thing in 4 sentences that David Swartling said in 4 pages, the ELCA will tell you, absolutely not. There's no provision in the ELCA's constitution for dual roster congregations, and you absolutely cannot do it. All right? In 1999, when the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was making the congregations that had dual affiliation with the ELCA and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod at that time, because there were a number of them, the Missouri Synod, when ELCA passed, called the Common Mission, said the ELCA can no longer be considered an Orthodox Lutheran church body. And they made their congregations choose to be part of one or the other. At that time, H. George Anderson, who was the presiding bishop of the ELCA, said this about dual-rostered congregations. He says, dual congregations don't pose a problem for the ELCA, though official documents don't provide for them. Concern for the spiritual needs of congregations sometimes requires unusual solutions. It was exactly 1 year later, almost, after LCMC had been formed, by the way, that Lowell Allman said there are no dual roster congregations permitted in the ELCA because the ELCA's constitution has no provision for them, which was the truth, but it was the part of the truth that didn't matter. Okay? Here's the part of the truth that did matter and still matters today, although the ELCA bishops will not tell you this. What matters is that the ELCA's constitution has in it a reservation of authority clause. It's 9.30. David Swartling mentions it in his memo and says it doesn't really apply. I don't care what he says. I'm not a lawyer, but I say that it does. All right? And here's what it says. Congregations, word for word from the ELCA's constitution, congregations of this church shall have authority, that's you, and authority means just that, you shall have authority in all matters that are not assigned by the Constitution and bylaws of this church to synods and the church-wide organization. What does that mean? It means if the ELCA's Constitution makes no provision for the dual rostering of congregations, if it's silent on the matter, that you, as a congregation, have authority in that matter. That's what that means. That's why 15% of our member congregations since 2001 have a dual affiliation with the ELCA and LCMC, 15%, some of them for 8 or 9 years. Some of them have just voted in the last month to do it, even after David Swartling's memo. 15% have dual affiliation. Every one of them has been told before they did it, you may absolutely not do that. And every one of them after they did has had absolutely nothing happen. Nothing. None of them have been disciplined to this day. Here's the thing. If the ELCA disciplines a congregation for having dual affiliation with the ELCA and LCMC, here's the worst that can happen to you. Number one, they can censure you. That's awful. They can tell you that you cannot send voting members to the Synod Assembly anymore until you repent and undo your evil ways. That's awful. The second thing they can do to you is tell you you can't have anybody from your congregation serve on a synod committee. That's awful. The last thing that they can do to you is kick you out. And the ELCA's constitution is clear. If you get kicked out for discipline, your property stays with you, no question. You don't have to have 2 votes of a 2/3 majority. You don't have to spend 90 days consulting with the bishop. Where in the heck is the downside to that? Seriously, where is it? I'm telling you this, and I'm not trying to be facetious, but for congregations that are in the midst of the biggest crisis of their life, honestly, many are, that are looking for some way to hold their congregation together. If you think that it will be helpful for you to be a part of LCMC and the ELCA at the same time, or NALC and the ELCA at the same time, then ignore your bishop. Ignore them. And just do it, for goodness sakes. Take a vote to join them both. You have to have concern for your congregation, and the ELCA needs, if they will or not, they need to return to their position in 1999. And that is that the concern for the spiritual needs of congregations requires unusual solutions. That's what they need to do, but they're so threatened by this little organization that they tell you you can't do it, even if it would mean helping your congregation stay together.